This is the New South Wales Fisheries Prawn Research Tag Team. Its job is to catch, tag and track 2,000 Tuggerah Lakes prawns.
Well, it's like giving him a name, if you like. We measure the animal and we know where we release him and when we released him. And if the public give the animal back to us, we can find out from them where he was caught and when he was caught.
About 80 tonnes of immature prawns congregate in the lakes each year before migrating north in the spring and summer. They live for 1 to 3 years and have been known to travel 1,000 kilometres up the coast to spawn. Prawns are the state's richest seafood resource, worth about $35 million each year to the fishing co-ops alone.
The program's aim to give us information which will allow us to better utilise our prawn resources in terms of the amount of yield that we can take out of our resources, but at the same time sustaining our stocks at a level which will allow us to maintain that high level of utilisation.
A $5 bounty, t-shirts and hats are on offer to people who report catching a tagged prawn.
The students from King Street Primary School at Singleton were staying at Hawks Nest Caravan Park. It was to have been their end-of-year camp before starting high school next year. The students arrived at the park on Tuesday. That night, one student fell ill and was taken back to Singleton. This morning, however, half the group was vomiting and complaining of stomach pains. With around 24 students feeling sick, teachers called off the camp a day early. An ambulance bus was called in to take the unwell students back to Singleton Hospital. There, anxious parents who'd been called by the school were waiting. The children were taken into the hospital waiting room. Although it obviously helped being back near mum or dad, most were still complaining of a headache and stomach cramps.
I felt sick in the night and then in the morning I kept spewing.
Once details had been taken, the students were examined individually and most allowed to leave. According to the hospital, all were suffering from gastroenteritis, a 48-hour virus common among children.
There may be a small number of cases who will be required to stay overnight, but I think the majority of children will be going home, yes.
For teachers at the camp, including wife of George Souris, member for the Upper Hunter, it was a camp they'll never forget.
No, not a great way to end a school camp, but I suppose it's bound to happen sometime with the number of excursions that kids go on, the number of kids that go on excursions. This sort of thing's got to happen once in a while, I suppose.
Jodie McKay, NBN News.
Things are looking pretty good, I tell you. Looking over there, see a bit of high cloud towards Frankston. Mate, my heart is still in my mouth, I tell you. This has got to be one of the biggest buzzes I've ever had.
A floating toxic broth, a quarter of the size of New South Wales, is currently bottled up in the Tasman Sea between the New South Wales coast and New Zealand, according to Wollongong's Chris Illett, a self-appointed environmental scientist who's been studying red tides for more than 20 years.
These toxic tides extend for thousands of kilometres continuously. This one at the moment is already a quarter the size of New South Wales, and when it picks up the Sydney sewage, it's going to be colossal. And it'll poison the oysters and kill the fish and the whales and the seabirds as far south as Tasmania.
Ocean upwellings bring nutrients to the surface, which in some cases react with sunlight to form toxic algae. Chris Illett claims these will be fed by effluent pumped from ocean sewage outfalls. The result will decimate marine life and be a danger to humans. While scientists agree sewage outfall does promote algal growth, few would support Mr Illett's prediction of an impending environmental catastrophe.
From what I've been able to find out, the CSIRO have found that there are algal blooms every year out to sea. They're common and they're predictable, and they're not doing very much harm at all. In fact, they're made up primarily of species that are non-toxic.
Marine scientists studying seaweeds and algae in Port Stephens a fortnight ago put the toxic ocean algae threat into perspective.
Because people don't know enough about it, they think that it means pollution. And what it is that the algae are doing nothing except responding to their environment. And if we're putting a lot of nutrients, excess nutrients or sewage into the water, then it's sort of like giving them a drink of V8 or something. I mean, they love it.
Common sense is the best shipmate for an outing on the water, but authorities aren't taking any chances when it comes to boat safety. Strict blood alcohol levels of 0.05 for recreational boat users and 0.02 for charter operators and young licence holders are now in force.
It's just trying to make it a little bit safer for the people out there. Everyone wants to go out and enjoy themselves, but we're asking them to control how much they drink, and that they are liable under the regulations and the acts now to, if they have an accident, what can happen.
Boat operators involved in accidents or reported driving dangerously will be subjected to breath test, possible fines and disqualifications. The new regulations will be enforced by the Waterways Authority and police. Random breath tests on the water may be just over the horizon.
Random breath testing on the waterways, I think, could be a while away, but it's certainly something that's been considered.
Another maritime authority, the Australian Customs Service, today celebrated its relocation to an office in the Newcastle CBD. 30 personnel involved in inspection and duties collection will now work from an office building shared with the MSB Waterways Authority on Hunter Street. Customs is the second largest Commonwealth revenue earning office next to taxation, and Newcastle, Australia's busiest port, contributes heavily to a nationwide $13 billion collection. The historic Customs House in the city's East End will undergo a $3.8 million refurbishment after being damaged in the 1989 earthquake.
The coroner delivered his findings after the 4-day inquest at Dungog. Mr Waller believes the fire probably began in the television room of the Palm Grove hostel about 11 p.m. on August the 1st. It spread rapidly through the building and ceiling, claiming the lives of 12 residents. He said the firefighting equipment was useless. Evacuation was the only solution. Coroner Waller was amazed that 28 people survived, given the intensity of the fire. The coroner said the residents of Palm Grove Hostel were unsupervised between 9 p.m. and 7 a.m. In his view, it was unsatisfactory to leave them alone for that period of time. However, Coroner Waller said it is not the function of an inquiry like this to lambast ordinary people for ordinary lapses from the state of perfection. Quite clearly, the Willses could have done better, as could the Department of Community Services. They have made mistakes which must be rectified in respect of other hostels. He recommended first that every inspection by the Department of Community Services officers of premises housing the handicapped, elderly or children should encompass fire safety, and any deficiencies in that regard be notified to the fire brigade. Second, that the Department of Community Services gives urgent consideration to increasing the number of staff available for inspections of hostel-style accommodation, so that facilities under the Community Welfare Act may be visited at least once every year. Coroner Wallace said the cause of the Palm Grove fire has not been proved. Jane Anderson, NBN News.
Much of the drama has gone out of the dispute here at Look At Me Now headland near Coffs Harbour. The City Council is still pushing ahead with the construction of the sewerage pipeline. The local residents are still opposed to the Outfall plan. But with police maintaining a high profile, having already made nearly 250 arrests, protest organisers don't want any more confrontation.
The people that have been demonstrating here are predominantly law-abiding ratepayer citizens. They're not the average type of person you see lying down in front of bulldozers. It's not necessary for that, and nor should it be necessary for the average person to be subjected to such indignity.
Some of the protesters, though, are trying a different approach. Peter Elser is on the 5th day of an anti-outfall hunger strike.
We want John Smith, our current mayor, to realise the absurdity of the situation, and our aim is to bring attention to that.
Meanwhile, the outfall issue continues to attract wider attention. Clean Up Australia campaigner Ian Kiernan visited the outfall site this afternoon as part of his own fact-finding exercise.
Well, I think the protesters have put up an amazing example of the fact that Australians do care, and I also think that they are putting up an example that ordinary people like you and me can change things, and I congratulate all of them for what they've done.
The outfall debate now moves back into the legal arena. The residents are challenging last month's Land and Environment Court decision which has allowed the project to proceed. Their appeal is set down for the Supreme Court in Sydney tomorrow. Ian Cameron in Coffs Harbour for NBN News.
The Grand Parade wound through town with bumper-to-bumper decorative floats and marching bands. They came in all shapes and sizes, from the short to the tall, from mini cars to semis, emergency services and sports clubs. There was a charming bride and groom complete with monkey suit, while others tried for a more exotic look. Finally, the odd horse and metal Mustang, but every man and his dog agreed the day was a great success.
For almost a decade, the future of this 220-hectare parcel of land has been the centre of debate. Should a residential development be approved, or should Greenpoint remain green? The state government's draft plan for 40 hectares of housing, and the remainder being a park, has been opposed by 200 public submissions. And now council has also rejected it.
The owner of the property has met with us and is willing to discuss further the proposition that the properties that he owns can come into a public ownership.
The council has written to Planning Minister Robert Webster today, telling him of its wish to keep the entire estate in public ownership. But the government will be asked to still buy one of the portions for $1 million. Discussions will also continue with the estate owners, with the possibility of a small section being set aside for an aged person's development. Alderman Carley is confident Mr Webster will accept the revised plan, but Marg Seacombe from the Greenpoint Action Committee is not so sure the government will still hand over the $1 million towards the park.
And I cannot see that it's any difference to them whether they give us the $1 million with strings attached saying we should develop 40 hectares, or whether they give us the $1 million to help us acquire the park.
A spokesman for the estate's owners, Carrington Holdings, wouldn't comment on the council's latest moves, but he did confirm that the idea of an aged person's development has been raised. As for the future of Greenpoint, he says he doesn't know until he enters discussions with the council. Scott Bevan, NBN News.
The Hunter Valley Training Company and the Hunter Group of Apprentices normally take on around 100 apprentices a year. This year, though, the situation is not good for those looking for a job in the metal or building trades.
I would doubt that very many will get apprenticeships at all. Certainly we're not looking to recruit or put any on, and we can't do that until we've got all our present apprentices on suspension back in the workforce.
The Hunter Group alone has had to suspend the apprenticeships of 1/5 of its 150 trainees and has set up an intensive training course for those out of work. 17-year-old Adam Bainan joined that course halfway through his carpentry apprenticeship. He's entitled to a formal training allowance from the government, but he admits that meagre amount is not an incentive to continue working.
What sort of money are you living on at the moment?
Oh, $28 a week. That's all I get.
And how hard is that?
Oh, that doesn't even put petrol in the car to get here.
Adam's situation is not unusual. Next year, thousands of school leavers will be after apprenticeships which just don't exist. While the recession will eventually end, its effects will be felt for a long time. Many people in Adam's situation are leaving their trade for the first job they can get, and ultimately it's industry which will suffer.
We're concerned that if industry can't keep these people on, when we come out of this recession, there'll be a demand for skills, and we wonder where we'll get these people from.
For some farmers, this is the first rainfall in 6 months. The slow, constant drizzle was a perfect tonic, soaking rain not too heavy to wash away soil. But the experts say they need much more.
What you're seeing out here now is, we hope, just the start, that we need this sort of rain now. We need some more next week, the week after that, right through Christmas.
In the Hunter, rain was widespread. In the last 24 hours, Jerry's Plains received 36 millimetres, Scone 39, Maitland 34. But even with a positive outlook, substantial pasture growth is still weeks away and farmers face massive problems feeding their stock. Today, the RSPCA passed on a warning to negligent farmers.
Doing nothing is not an option.
Executive Director of the RSPCA, David Butcher, was at Tocal Agricultural College advising livestock inspectors to be aware. At least 12 mistreatment cases are seen per week throughout country New South Wales. Only 1% of calls lead to prosecutions, and while the RSPCA says farmers have nothing to fear, hiding behind the drought is no excuse.
What we're saying, of course, is that our graziers, that our farmers must have strategies that they can put in place to take drought into account.
The much feared but rarely seen speed camera has operated in Newcastle for some weeks, but already a kind of motoring folklore has grown up around it. Police say the camera will operate constantly throughout the Christmas period from the start of school holidays next week, but before the blitz begins, they've offered to dispel a few myths. Popular myth 1, because the camera identifies the car and not the driver, the speeding fine will go to the owner, who will have to pay the money but won't lose licence points. Not so, according to Senior Constable Chris Manning.
No, that is not the case. The infringement notice will be sent to the registered owner of the vehicle, and the registered owner nominates either himself as the driver or other person who borrowed the vehicle.
Another myth is that the camera won't operate in wet weather. That's half true. Police won't place an officer out in the rain for hours on end, but they can use shelter, such as shop awnings. It is true that you can't be booked if your number plate is obscured, but the bad news is police are cracking down on obscured plates and there's a fine of $51. Also true, there is a margin set on the radar above the actual speed limit, but you'd be taking a gamble trying to guess what the allowance is.
This radar camera is utilised at the moment on high-speed offences which incur 3 points or more loss on their licence.
It's been a turbulent 18 months for the Northern Soccer Federation, riding out major restructuring in the sport from its quake-damaged Adamstown headquarters. With 17,000 members and 250 participating clubs stretching to the Queensland border, it's the largest sporting association outside Sydney. The grant, along with the Federation's funds and an insurance payout on the wrecked building, will go toward a new single-storey structure at the Bryant Street site, expected to cost around $160,000. Officials say the new headquarters will help consolidate the Federation's governing role in what is expected to be a year of great potential for development of the sport.
It's the start of soccer in northern New South Wales. This is just the springboard. We've done some restructuring this year, both within Newcastle and in the country areas, so this is just a further fillip for the Federation.
5 full-time staff members will work from their headquarters, which will also offer meeting space for the Junior Macquarie District clubs and the Referees Association. Demolition of the existing building is expected to start soon. It wasn't a day for the beach, but hardy swimmers were confronted with a putrid-smelling raft of grease lapping Bar Beach and Dixon Park. Responding to complaints, Inspector Dave Jamieson closed the beach and notified the Water Board and Health Department. He has his own ideas about the origin of the slick.
That problem that the Water Board seems to not want to know about is back again at Bar Beach. Since the outfall's been put out further, they seem to think that it's not going to come into Bar Beach, but it certainly does, and the evidence on the beach this morning, a lot of grease from, I think, the sewage outfall.
A prevailing southeasterly breeze over the past 2 days may have driven the paste-like flotsam ashore. Representatives of the Water Board suggested stormwater runoff and algae were more likely causes. The Burwood Beach Treatment Works had reported no malfunctions. Water and grease samples were tested at the board's laboratory, while NBN commissioned an independent analysis through the University of Newcastle. Both results should be known tomorrow. Andrew Lobb reporting for NBN News.